Hello, everyone. My name is Siobhán Wills, and on behalf of the Transitional Justice Institute, I'm welcoming you all to this webinar on the current Omni-crisis in international law. For some time now, international lawyers have been commenting on the scale and frequency of serious violations of the UN Charter, international criminal law, international humanitarian law, and international human rights law. These breaches have been widely condemned by international lawyers, but are attracting highly politicized responses from those states that have the power and resources to end these violations. This webinar focuses on the attacks by Israel and the United States on Iran last month, and the concurrent escalation of genocidal actions and war crimes by Israeli forces in Palestine, which is continuing. There will be an opportunity to submit questions through the chat at the end of the presentations. I will introduce all of the speakers now so that the discussion can flow more easily. I can only mention a small part of our speakers' extensive biographies because of time. Marko Milanovic is Professor of Public International Law at the University of Reading and Director of the Global Law Research Group. In 2021, he served as one of 3 high-level experts appointed by the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights to assist her in conducting a comprehensive examination of alleged human rights violations committed in Belarus since 1st May 2020, as mandated by the Human Rights Council. In 2022, he was awarded the Serge Lazarev Prize for Excellence in Legal Services by the NATO Allied Command Operations of Office of Legal Affairs. He has also advised a task force supporting the Prosecutor General of Ukraine regarding accountability for crimes committed during the Ukrainian conflict. In 2024, he served as an academic expert of the panel of experts in international law convened by the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court in support of his investigation into the situation in the state of Palestine for the purpose of advising the prosecutor on arrest warrant applications against Hamas and Israeli leaders. Professor Milanovic is a prolific author in human rights law, public international law, international criminal law, and the law of armed conflict. His work has been cited by judges of the European Court of Human Rights, the Supreme Court of Canada, the UK Supreme Court, and the High Court of England and Wales, as well as by the International Law Commission. Susan Power. Dr. Susan Power is Head of Legal Research and Advocacy at Al-Haq and has been working with Al-Haq for over 10 years. Al-Haq is an independent NGO based in Ramallah, founded in 1979 to protect and promote human rights and the rule of law in the occupied Palestinian territories. It has consultative status with the UN Economic and Social Council. Al-Haq documents violations of individual and collective rights in the occupied Palestinian territories, irrespective of the identity of the perpetrator. It seeks to end breaches through advocacy before national and international mechanisms. Until recently, Dr. Power was based in Ramallah, but has relocated to Ireland because of procedural difficulties in obtaining a visa under the new Israeli military procedures on entry into the West Bank, which were published in 2022. She's co-editor with Nada Swanson of Prolonged Occupation and International Law, Israel and Palestine. Sahar Francis. Sahar Francis is a Palestinian lawyer and human rights defender. Her work focuses on political and civil rights issues in the occupied Palestinian territory, especially those of Palestinian prisoners and detainees. Thomas Hansen. Thomas Hansen is a senior lecturer and colleague here in the School of Law and Transitional Justice Institute. He is currently co-investigator on a 4-year project funded by the Danish Research Council about standardization in transitional justice. He previously worked on a British Academy Leverhulme-funded research project which examines accountability processes covering alleged British war crimes in Iraq. In 2023-24, he was the Maria Zambrano Distinguished Researcher at Carlos III University in Madrid, and he was also Senior Research Fellow with the International Council of Environmental Law. Thomas's research has also received funding from the Royal Irish Society and Open Society Foundations. He has published extensively on legal topics relating to Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda, Iraq, Palestine, the UK. Unfortunately, Thomas is not able to get online tonight, but he has sent us a video recording. Roua Al Taweel. Dr. Al Taweel completed her PhD in December 2024 with a dissertation titled Narratives of Transformative Gender Justice, the Interplay of Syrian Forced Displacement and Nationality Laws. A section of her thesis has been developed into a journal article, Responsibility to Protect and Syria's Displacement, Unprotected at Home and Abroad, which has been published in Global Responsibility to Protect. Dr. Al Taweel has worked on issues related to forced displacement since 2006, initially responding to the displacement of Iraqis and Lebanese to Syria, and later focusing on Syrian displacement. She's also lectured here in international law, here in the School of Law, Ulster University, and she is a co-founding member of the Syrian Academics and Researchers Network in the UK. And now I'm going to pass the floor to Dr. Al Taweel, who will set out the context for this discussion, and then we'll move to presentations.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here today with you. And to admit, it's difficult to recount everything that has taken place over the past few weeks in just a few minutes. The scale of violence, the speed of escalation, and the brazenness of legal disregard defy compression. But a few moments stand out. I want to start by saying that in the West today, we hear the international law is breaking down, but in the Levant, it never existed in the first place. Not for protection, not for justice. Since its inception, international law has functioned to manage imperial interests, not restrain them, most exemplified through legalizing the colonial mandates and settler colonialism, Israel in the region. What we are witnessing now is not collapse, it's exposure. In Gaza, the past few weeks have been some of the deadliest since October 7. Over 600 Palestinians were killed in 1 week, nearly 200 of them while trying to reach food distribution points. The scale of starvation is engineered. The destruction of hospitals, refugee shelters, and aid convoys continues. Israel is not targeting Hamas. It's annihilating the infrastructure of life. But Gaza, though the most tragic, is only part of the picture. The West Bank remains under daily siege, with settlers and soldiers displacing communities in real time. In southern Lebanon, Israel's bombardment never actually ceased, killing civilians, and entire borders, villages have been emptied again. And in Syria, after the fall of Assad in December 2024, Israel has deepened its occupation, moving into Quneitra and Beit Jinn in rural Damascus. It has demolished homes, displaced families, and seized key water sources feeding the Yarmouk Basin. These are not isolated security incidents. They are part of a long-standing policy of expansion through dispossession, a greater Israel settler colonial project that is now known to the whole world. In June 13, Israel escalated its confrontation with Iran by launching coordinated strikes on Iranian military installation across multiple provinces. These were not defensive measures, they were preemptive attacks far beyond Israel's borders. Within days, the United States joined, launching bunker-busting bombs on nuclear sites. The UK deployed draft jets. On June 2020, 24 UN experts described these acts as flagrant violations of jus cogens, preemptory norms of international law. The response? Justifications, more justifications, as if empire is above the law, again. And yet, most UN member states consistently vote to uphold Palestinian rights, to condemn aggression, and to call for accountability. But one US veto nullifies them all. If the majority of the world cannot restrain one violent actor, what does that say about the law? What kind of system allows a single state to block global consensus while simultaneously supplying the weapons and rhetoric of war? This is not law, it's theater. What we are confronting is not a series of isolated legal breaches or tragic miscalculations, but a systematic collapse of the normative architecture designed to constrain violence. Resistance in this case is not ideological, it's logical. The rational choice in the face of annihilation. The more force Israel and its allies exercise, the stronger resistance grows. This is basic physics. When the choice is between a horrible life and death, or death and dignity, people will choose to die standing. History has confirmed this again and again. Still, we must return to international law, not because it has served those who need it most, but because it remains the only shared language through which we can demand accountability, repair, and dignity. We must reclaim it, not as an instrument of Western interest, but as a global responsibility. Because if law continues to be suspended for the powerful and imposed on the powerless, the only path left is one of permanent violence. And that's not just a regional danger, it is a planetary one. And with that, I'm looking forward to hearing the reflections from today's esteemed guests. Thank you.
Thank you, Roua, for your very powerful context-setting introduction. I'm going to pass the floor now to Marko Milanovic.
Thank you, Siobhán, so much. It's a great pleasure to be with you all this evening. My remarks will mainly focus on Iran. Before I move to Iran, I just want to make a couple of points. The first point is that Iran and Gaza are obviously related issues, right? It's all taking place in the same region, in the same context, by very similar actors. They're all involved, but they are kind of also distinct, right? So there are, what Israel is doing in Gaza is not exactly necessarily the same thing it is doing in Iran. The suffering of the people of Gaza is not necessarily the same thing that is going on in Iran. Iran, of course, is also not a state, how do I put it, with clean hands in all of this. Legally, as I will explain, I think the situation is pretty clear, but one should not neglect the malignant sort of effects of various policies that Iran has also pursued over many decades in analyzing what is taking place now. So I think that is an important point. The second point I want to make is that the events in Iran have somehow overshadowed what's been going on in Gaza in parallel. And that is, to some extent, a natural human nature is such that we tend to focus on the most recent catastrophe unfolding. But again, the two issues are distinct, and the fact that Israel has violated international law by using force in Iran, as has the United States, should not at all kind of disable us from analyzing what is taking place in Gaza at the same time. And my final point is that, as Roua was saying, the situation is escalating rapidly, and I think today we're at a point where no reasonable international lawyer can deny that Israel is engaging in systematic violations of international law, including rules of international criminal law. I mean, just today, the Israeli government openly announced the policy of essentially building a concentration camp in Rafah, in southern Gaza, to concentrate the population before it is actually expelled outside the Gaza Strip, right? So the whole endeavor is no longer even shielded in any kind of way, in any kind of plausible argument that this is something that could at all be legally justified. So let me, having said all that, let me move to Iran. The Israeli-American strikes on Iran raise various kinds of legal questions. Two sets of questions are the most important: whether those strikes violated the jus ad bellum, the international law that regulates resort to force in international relations, as you know, based in the UN Charter. And the second being whether the strikes themselves complied with the rules of IHL, the jus in bello, the law of armed conflict. I will talk about the former. I will not talk about the latter. I will just briefly flag that when it comes to the latter, as we could see from many, many different contexts, right, the application of the targeting rules of IHL is exceptionally fact sensitive and context sensitive. And it is really difficult to say that from the mere fact that, say, almost 1,000 Iranians have died and most of them are civilians, it is really difficult to say from that fact alone that Israel violated IHL. It is easier to say when you have patterns of behavior like we've had in Gaza that targeting rules have not been complied with. I don't think Iran is exactly of the same kind. There are some particular rules of IHL, though, which are specifically of specific interest in with regard to Iran. And here I mean in particular the targeted killing of Iranian nuclear scientists, which to my mind is almost impossible to justify if those scientists are civilians, which most of them are, because the mere participation in a nuclear program does not count as so-called direct participation in hostilities that would make people liable to being killed under IHL. So that's all I will say with regard to Iran and IHL. I will now move to the jus ad bellum, the law on the use of force. And here I think the situation is as clear can be, right? So the only rule that Israel could plausibly rely on is the right to self-defense in Article 51 of the Charter. That rule requires either an ongoing attack, an armed attack by Iran against Israel, or, in the view of quite a few international lawyers, an attack that is not necessarily has already happened, but is imminent. On either of these two grounds, I find it very difficult to say that Israel's use of force could ever be justified. Arguments have been made, and there's now loads of blog posts that have been written about these issues from various perspectives. Arguments have been made that, for example, Iran's involvement in the acts of various proxy actors in the region in Israel against Israel, like the Houthis or Hezbollah, somehow justify Israel's use of force against Iran. That argument has various problems associated with it, in particular the extent of actually Iranian control over these proxy actors. But the main one is one of necessity and proportionality. I do not understand how a so-called ongoing attack, which currently could be like a missile or two fired by the Houthis against Israel every so often, could justify in terms of necessity and proportionality killing the entire Iranian military leadership and destroying all of the nuclear sites and so on. So the only argument that really makes sense in this particular context is this idea of anticipatory self-defense against an imminent armed attack by Iran. Now, when we discuss this whole question, it is really important to understand that some Western countries, in particular, the past few decades, have been trying to push forward expansive definitions of what imminence is. And the most emblematic such endeavor are the so-called Bethlehem principles, which were articulated as some kind of academic effort by Sir Daniel Bethlehem, who was at the time the former legal advisor of the Foreign Office, who published this article in the American Journal of International Law, which also received various responses at the time, which then several states, including the UK, took as a kind of correct articulation of how this idea of imminence is to be understood. So what essentially some Western states have been doing is that they have tried to move from a conception of an imminent attack as one that is temporally about to happen. Yeah. So an attack that will happen tomorrow, and you can respond today without waiting for the first blow, right? That kind of position, has a certain logic to it. It is not a crazy legal view, right? That you don't have to wait for the blow to actually hit you before you can respond. But what some states and scholars have been doing is really saying, well, the attack doesn't have to happen tomorrow. It doesn't have to happen within a week or a month or 2 months. It can happen maybe even years in the future. But so long as force is the only option that's available today, there's a last window of opportunity in which we have to act. The attack is imminent. And that kind of stretching of this notion of imminence kind of makes sense in some contexts. It was designed to, for example, enable the argument that, say, Western states can use force against Al-Qaeda and its affiliates overseas without waiting for another attack by Al-Qaeda, if you see what I mean. But stretched to its limits, it essentially devolves into a pure theory of prevention, that, we think there's a threat and we therefore have the right to use force to defuse it. Now, that argument, in my view, fails for a number of reasons. The main reason is that there is insufficient evidence of Iranian intent to actually develop the weapon and to then use the weapon against Israel. So that's the issue of an imminent armed attack. And then there is insufficient evidence that force was in any kind of way a measure of last resort. I mean, inter alia, the use of force happened while negotiations were taking place. And the only reason, by the way, why the use of force was even conceivably necessary is because Trump, when he was president for the first time, actually withdrew the United States from the JCPOA, which had actually effectively very much curbed the Iranian nuclear program. So let me take these issues step by step. On the question of whether Iran intends to build a nuclear weapon or intended to do so a couple of weeks ago, I find it very problematic when some people say, and actually the non-aligned movement passed a declaration to that effect after the strikes, that Iran's nuclear program was peaceful and that Israel was attacking peaceful facilities. Listen, Iran's nuclear program is definitely not a peaceful one, right? To build a peaceful nuclear program, you need to enrich uranium to like a little bit below 4%. They've enriched uranium to 60%. Like, there is no reason to enrich uranium to that level unless you want to have the option of building a bomb soon, right? But having the option of building a bomb soon is not the same thing as intending to actually do it, right? It still requires a further decision of the Iranian leadership. And even if that intent existed, there's a huge step from that to actually an intent to use that bomb against the state of Israel while Israel is already armed with a nuclear weapon and can strike against you and completely obliterate you, right? So the evidence that currently exists simply does not support the proposition that Iran had committed itself to attacking Israel with a nuclear weapon in the future. There was a risk of that. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, it's not like the Israelis went cuckoo and got concerned with Iran's nuclear program. Of course, they're concerned about Iran's nuclear program. But the idea that Iran was imminently going to attack Israel with a nuclear weapon is just not supported by the evidence. It's not me who says that. It's the American intelligence services who say that, right? So when the Israelis presented whatever evidence they have, which includes, by the way, not simply what Iranian leaders say publicly, but God knows the level of intelligence gathering that Israel has within Iran's government, which is incredible, right? I mean, they've penetrated that government as far as is humanly possible. When they presented that evidence to the American intelligence agencies, they said this is not good enough, right? So the only reason why America went to war now is because Donald Trump basically overruled the judgment of his own intelligence services. So the first argument that Iran was imminently going to attack Israel does not make sense. And even if it did, as I said, the idea that somehow now was the very last moment in which one could act to stop that attack, I mean, is just pure nonsense, right? Negotiations were taking place. I don't know what the negotiations could have led to, but certainly we cannot say that while the negotiations are taking place, we have to act right now. And Israel has reached this decision, by the way, to use force against Iran, as has been reported many, many months ago. Like, this is no idea of imminence that can make any kind of sense legally. So that's where we are. I mean, my view is that Iran's use of force against Israel is, Israel's use of force against Iran is clearly unlawful. I also don't think this whole idea of an ongoing armed attack or an ongoing armed conflict can be used as a justification, but I'm happy to revisit that in the Q&A. The American use of force is equally unlawful simply because America could only use force by way of collective self-defense of Israel. And if Israel does not have a claim to self-defense, neither does America. Some other arguments have been made. For example, in the UK, I mean, Lord David Wolfson, who is the Shadow Attorney General, also said that, in his view, Iran was imminently going to attack the UK. So the UK could have bombed Iran even if the Americans and the Israelis didn't, which, again, with all due respect, I don't think makes any sense factually. He also made the argument that humanitarian intervention could justify the strikes against Iran, that this was the only way of preventing some kind of impending genocide against the Jewish people. Again, I find that a very difficult argument to accept, either as a matter of principle, because there is no rule of humanitarian intervention in international law, or on the facts. With 100,000 dead probably in Gaza, it is really difficult to say that somehow the people of Israel are about to be imminently the victims of genocide. So that I think is it. The situation, as far as I understand, is very clear legally. The reactions of Western states are really interesting to observe here, because most of them clearly hate Iran, like, for obvious reasons. They don't mind necessarily what has happened, except for some states like France, which have criticized the whole thing. But they were all very careful in, say, supporting Israel's right to self-defense in some kind of very vague language, without ever saying, and this is what justified Israel's use of force. And in fact, in the UK, the actual Attorney General, Lord Hermer, from what has been reported, correctly advised the government that the use of force against Iran was unlawful, which is why the UK was not involved, and why UK air bases like the Diego Garcia Air Base in Chagos was not used. So I will stop here with just one final comment. This is not over, right? So we should not think that because Donald Trump said, oh, we destroyed all of it and great success, that the whole thing is actually over. It's not. Like, nobody knows at this point in time just how much of the 350 kilograms of enriched uranium stockpile that Iran had built, how much of it remains. Nuclear scientists, people are saying that Iran can, if it wants to, very, very quickly create new cascades of centrifuges which can enrich uranium up to the highest level that is necessary to build a bomb within weeks, if need be. We have no idea what the intention of the Iranian leadership is. We have also no idea what the Americans and the Israelis will do in the future. So it could very well be that this conflict will reignite again and again and again. And every time that happens, we will have to do another jus ad bellum analysis. From, again, where we stand today, I think the answer is fairly clear, that the US-Israeli attack was a breach of the Charter. So I'll finish here.
Thank you, Marko, for that very clear analysis. Susan, I'm going to move to you now. Dr. Susan Power from ALHAC.
Thanks very much. And really appreciate the invite as well. So I'll just start by pointing out that the genocide in Gaza has been ongoing since at least October 7th, but even before this, there's been an ongoing settler colonization and apartheid of the Palestinian territory, which has been ongoing since the Nakba of 1948. And Israel is continuing to dispossess Palestinians across the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza, erasing Palestinian presence, forcibly displacing them, replacing them with Israeli settlers, and annexing more and more territory. So we aren't looking at the situation from the last couple of weeks in a vacuum. But since around the 8th of May, we've had Prime Minister Netanyahu threatening what he called an intensive operation on Gaza. And he said the rules are about to change very soon. And then on the 18th of May, Israel then launched an extensive large-scale ground invasion on Gaza, which are called Operation Gideon's Chariots. And Israel's Minister of Finance explained at that time, we are capturing, cleaning out and retaining areas. We are destroying what is left of the Gaza Strip. Israel's Minister of National Security, Ben-Gvir, stated at that time as well, we must now enter Gaza with all our might and finish the job. We had a member of Israel's Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, MK Ohad Tal, and he explained that the goal is to hold 70% of Gaza Strip's territory, that Israel will hold the Gaza Strip for many, many years. Then on the 19th of May, Israel's Minister of Finance outlined a plan to transfer the population of Gaza to the south. And he said as part of the fighting, the IDF is moving the population from the fighting zones. So the population will reach the south of the Strip, and then from there to third countries as part of President Trump's plan. We are disassembling Gaza and leaving it as piles of rubble with total destruction for which there has been no precedent globally. And the world isn't stopping us. The Minister for Science and Technology, Gila Gamil, has announced the establishment of an immigration directorate, and this is to enable the construction of infrastructure for the departure of Gazans from the Gaza Strip, with the aim, as she says, of the departure of 1,700,000 Palestinians in an orderly and thorough manner. So as Israel was bombing Iran in June, Israeli parliamentarian Debbie Biden stated, I don't want anything in Gaza, just that we see the sea from Sderot. And we had a settler spokesperson, Rabbi Yashai, who echoed, Gazans should be sent on boats to Europe to clear it out for Israel, and anyone who stays should be declared an enemy combatant and killed. Send them to Cyprus, send them to Spain, send them to the southern France, to Ireland. And what we have been seeing while all eyes were watching Iran is the mass population transfer in Gaza. And this is the most significant replay of the current genocide. So Israel is preventing UNRWA and international aid organizations effectively from operating in Gaza, if not very minimal operations, and instead has imposed a system which is structurally designed to alter the demography of Gaza. And it's using the delivery of aid to control the population, to force their displacement. So there's now one aid site, a distribution aid site in Al-Baraj in middle Gaza. And down at the bottom of Gaza, at the border with Egypt in West Rafah, there are another 3 aid distribution sites. There's no aid center at all in North Gaza. And this should come as no surprise. Israel had intensified its attacks on North Gaza from October to December last year. It had leveled a good portion of the territory under its version of the General's Plan that cut off aid to force the permanent population transfer in what we would say is a continuation of the 1948 Nakba. One of the architects of the General's Plan is Giora Island, and it's his idea, amongst other generals, to lay siege to northern Gaza and annex territory. And he was filmed on the 9th of June, standing next to the main water pipe that enters Gaza, urging Prime Minister Netanyahu that cutting off water will lead to victory. Between March and mid-May, Israel has implemented a total ban on international agencies' delivery of aid to Gaza. And the delivery of aid who controls the aid, and the execution of this mass forcible transfer plan is all linked. So Israel has taken control of the delivery of aid and contracted this out to a United States private contractor, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And the delivery of aid has been described under this agency as unashamedly inhumane. The displaced Palestinian civilians are corralled into a tiny corner of the Gaza Strip and targeted and killed as they queue for food. And by the 27th of June, 613 Palestinians had been killed waiting for aid. One Israeli soldier was interviewed by Haaretz, an Israeli newspaper, and he said it's a killing field. Another soldier said, we open fire early in the morning if someone tries to get in line from a few hundred meters away, but there's no danger to the forces. On 17th of June, Israeli soldiers launched tank shells into the crowd, killing 38 Palestinians. Israel has ordered a military investigation into the killings in Gaza at the aid distribution site. But essentially, this is the Israeli military investigating itself. And we've seen this same pattern of sham probes that are opened and then closed again following extreme delays. The system itself has been described as a fig leaf or a whitewash mechanism by Israeli human rights organizations, B'Tselem and Yesh Din. And this system is epitomized by extreme delays in investigation, vagueness in the composition of the fact-finding mission, and very low prosecution rates. There's very lenient sentences like community service for the killing of Palestinians. So it's essentially a whitewash and a sham. At the same time, we've now, since 18th of May, seen over 680,000 Palestinians displaced, and they're continuously corralled into ever-shrinking spaces within Gaza. There's no infrastructure and there's nowhere safe in Gaza. Just last week, there was an additional 30,000 Palestinians displaced. A UN Human Rights Office spokesperson stated, these evacuations failed to comply with the requirements of international humanitarian law. Israel is not taking any measures to provide accommodation for the evacuated population, nor does it ensure that those evacuations are conducted in satisfactory conditions of hygiene, health, safety, and nutrition. There's now 71% of the Gaza Strip which is inaccessible to Palestinians, and 92% of the housing units are either damaged or destroyed. Warships in the coast fire at displaced Palestinians from the sea. And Palestinians are now under an internet blackout, which means they don't have access even to the evacuation orders where they're supposed to even be displaced to. Almost the entire area of the Gaza Strip is under evacuation order. We've Palestinians who are forced into these, what we call safe zones, but they're unsafe. The main one being Al-Mawasi, which continues to be bombed. The latest attack only a few days ago on July the 5th killed another 7 Palestinians in their tents, leaving Palestinian children disfigured with burn injuries. The UN Secretary General has warned that the situation in Gaza is beyond description. It's beyond atrocious, beyond inhumane. What we are witnessing is the complete and total destruction of the Gaza Strip. Israel is targeting schools, tents, residential buildings sheltering Palestinians who've been forcibly displaced, along with the systematic destruction of Gaza's healthcare system in what is a continuing pattern of genocidal acts. Prime Minister Netanyahu stated only last week, we are destroying more and more houses. They will have nowhere to return to. At the same time, malnutrition and mortality exceeds the IPC famine thresholds. One 78-year-old man has pleaded, I can no longer find food. Every night I sleep, waiting for death. No fuel has entered Gaza in more than 17 weeks. And 3 days ago, the UN Secretary General has warned the lifelines for survival are being cut off. Without an urgent influx of fuel, incubators will shut down, ambulances will be unable to reach the injured and the sick, and water cannot be purified. Doctors are forced to choose who gets the last vial of medicine or the last ventilator, and the aid workers themselves are starving. The ICRC warned this week, Gaza is running out of body bags. During Israel's attacks on Iran, it intensified its attacks on Gaza. Fighter jets returned from Iran with surplus ammunition. They were ordered to drop the surplus missiles on Gaza in large-scale attacks. A military spokesperson explained that the bombing saved a great deal of resources. One soldier has outlined the shoot-to-kill policy in Gaza. He said, "We have a territory that we are in, and the commands are that everyone who comes inside needs to die. If they're inside, they're dangerous, and you need to kill them, no matter who it is. It might be like a teenager riding his bicycle." Battalions of Israeli soldiers celebrate both the start and the end of missions with chants, "May your villages burn." Since 7th of October, 57,012 Palestinians have been killed and 134,592 Palestinians injured in the genocide. In May 2024, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations stood before the General Assembly with a miniature shredder and shredded the UN Charter. Israel has outlined its intent to not comply with international law are the decisions of the International Criminal Court, which Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has derided as anti-Semitic. Israel's Minister of Defense, or as then Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, and the Minister of National Security, Ben Gvir, have previously asserted that the provisional measures ordered by the International Court of Justice were decisions that endanger the continued existence of the State of Israel and must not be listened to. Just last week, Israel banned major human rights organizations that work on accountability in their work submitting to the International Criminal Court from entering Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. And they banned two former special rapporteurs, John Dugard and Professor Michael Link, from entering the territory. International journalists are banned from entering the Gaza Strip. Israel kills journalists to prevent the documentation and recording of the evidence of its crimes. Only yesterday, Israel's Minister of Defense announced a plan to establish a humanitarian city on the ruins of Rafah. And the idea is to accommodate the entire population of the Gaza Strip, starting with those in Al-Mawasi. But Palestinians will not be able to leave this part of the territory. And they are encouraged, he said, to voluntarily emigrate from the Gaza Strip to other countries. Just this morning, Israel's Minister of Finance urged the continuation of the destruction of Gaza, and he said, "We have no choice but to keep fighting until the enemy is destroyed." Israel's Minister of National Security tweeted this morning, "There is no need to negotiate. They must be crushed to dust, starved to death, not given air through humanitarian aid that provides them oxygen. A complete siege, military crushing, encouragement of migration and settlement. These are the keys to absolute victory." While there are numerous statements from the UN Secretary General, UN experts, findings from the Special Committee, the UN Commission of Inquiry on Genocide in Gaza, these findings have not been met with actions. There's been no sanctions against Israel, no EU countermeasures. The EU Association Agreement has still not even been suspended. The international community seems incapable of stopping a military superpower of the world from carpet bombing a population completely locked into a 25-mile strip of land, a population of whom 70% are under the age of 30. Palestinians are now in an ever-ending cycle of death and terror by Israel's settler colonial apartheid regime, which is creating conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of the Palestinian people in an ongoing and worsening Nakba. At Al-Haq, we have asked the international community, and we ask the world, we urge people of conscience to continue to assert maximum pressure on your governments, take immediate and concrete actions to put an end to Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people, and states should unseat Israel from the UN General Assembly. Corporations should stop doing business with Israel and in Israeli settlements and governments should adopt national legislation to prevent all trade and settlement goods and products and all those maintaining the illegal occupation. People of conscience should inform themselves on the boycott, divest and sanction movement and take actions. States should impose a full arms embargo on Israel, economic, diplomatic, individual sanctions, and prosecute Israeli perpetrators for international crimes. But above all, and most of all, the root causes of the current genocide must be addressed. And that requires the full dismantling of Israel's racist, discriminatory apartheid regime on both sides of the Green Line. And we would call for the fact states would work on and enact the findings of the recommendations of the advisory opinion and ensure that Israel's unlawful military presence in the occupied territory is ended, the full removal of all settlers, and the return of all Palestinians to their territory. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. It's very difficult to listen, and it must be to such the scale of genocidal actions that are taking place in Palestine, and it must be extremely harder for you working in it. Thank you. I'll turn now to give the floor to Sahar Francis.
Good evening, and thank you for the Transitional Justice Institute for inviting me to take part in this important, powerful panel. And it's even more difficult to speak after Susan. And I echo all what she said, and of course what Professor Marko started with. And this is exactly raised the question that you put in the title of this webinar today, an omni-crisis of the international law, because like imagine that as a lawyer for 30 years, you're trying to work within this context of the international law, international human rights law, and international humanitarian law. And you want to convince yourself and your colleagues and your people that it works. And this is the way how it should work. International law was developed in order to protect people under occupation in wars and in other crises around the world. And the Palestinian cause is the perfect example of the collapse and the failure of all this system. Is it really the intention? What was the intention? Was the intention of the international community after the Second World War in developing all this system of international mechanisms to protect human rights. And it failed every time and for decades when it comes for the Palestinian context. It didn't started with the genocide in October 23. Like the example of the prisoners, the case of the Palestinian prisoners that I'm working in this field for more than 28 years, I can assure you that this is the most powerful example about the failure of the international system when it comes for the Israeli occupation practices. Why Israel was treated all these decades in this way that they managed to commit all these serious crimes, torture, killings, isolation, arbitrary detention, lack of fair trial. Every day you can take the list and you can tick all the grave violations, all the war crimes and crimes against humanity that were committed against the prisoners for decades now. Israel committed without any accountability. This is not reflecting the failure, the total failure of this mechanism. And when Professor Marko was saying about the way how people now are trying to give content or what imminent could mean in the international law, this is exactly brings me to the discussion over the torture and the ticking bomb scenario that the Israeli High Court, believe me, Israel were using the international law or misusing the international law in a very systematic way since the creation in 1948, and it intensified definitely after the occupation of 1967, and with the full support of the highest court in Israel, the Israeli High Court, that was always finding a legal way how to expand these explanations of such terminology, ticking bomb, human shields, protection, security needs. All these frames were elaborated in a way that can offer full protection for the interest of the state in a way that is not fulfilling the obligations according to the international law and allowing in a legal way violating the international law and committing these serious crimes. And take the decision of the High Court on the torture cases of 1999, when the Israeli High Court gave the authority the green light for the interrogators to use this necessity defense that there is a need out of the security threat that a ticking bomb will explode and kill someone. We can torture and still we can protect it and not found accountable that we are committing a war crime. And this is the way how torture were justified in the legal system in Israel, in the military courts, and were practiced for decades and continue to be practiced against thousands of Palestinian prisoners in a very systematic way. So you can learn how to manipulate the international law and international norms and standards in the international humanitarian law or international human rights law from the Israeli experience. And for decades, local organizations, Palestinians and Israelis, and international human rights organizations, lawyers, everyone who worked with the Palestinian prisoners were talking and alerting about the grave violations that they were committed in this system of the military courts. It ended up just with tens of reports by the different special rapporteurs, the CAT Convention, the Child Protection Convention, or other entities in the UN system, the Commission of Inquiry or other investigation bodies, but never with clear measures or powerful steps like sanctions or other ways how to make Israel really to force Israel to respect their obligations in international law and to stop violating the international law in this way. Never. And this is also a failure, a huge failure for the system, that there's a limit how to activate the system, how to make it powerful and meaningful, and not just to be writing more reports and condemning and issuing statements according to the international standards. All the violations against the prisoners actually became more serious, and the situation deteriorated very seriously after the 7th of October. None of the practices were a new practice. No, all what I will describe now that the prisoners faced after the 7th of October were a common practice, were policies that they were used systematically all these decades by the Israeli occupation forces, whether the army, whether the police, whether the prison system, or the interrogators in the security service. But everything is escalated in a very serious way. So the mass arrest campaigns that they were launched immediately in all the occupied territories, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, in the Gaza Strip, even inside 48 Palestinian state, like citizens of the State of Israel were arrested for incitement, journalists, students, everyone could be subjected for detention based on the social media use. Hundreds of people were arrested just because they dared to show sympathy with the people of Gaza. This is were considered as incitement for violence. In the West Bank, more than 17,000 people were arrested so far. In Gaza, we don't have accurate number because thousands were arrested and the authorities were never disclosing accurate figures. Hundreds and thousands literally disappeared. We're still, Palestinian organizations have thousands of names that we don't know where these people, whether they are killed and under the rubble or they are detained in prisons, because we had few cases where we informed by the authorities that this person was never arrested and then out of a sudden he was released in the exchange deal back to the Gaza Strip. So still thousands of people are missing from the Gaza Strip. Immediately after the 7th of October, the prison authority totally closed all the prisons inside the state, which means they automatically canceled all the Red Cross committee visits, all the lawyers' visits, and all the families' visits. Till today, the Red Cross and the families are not allowed to visit. The prisoners were totally isolated. They raided their cells and they attacked them physically. They were, some people died literally in these attacks on the first couple of weeks, and they confiscated all the clothes, all the food, all the books, the property of the prisoners, and they kept them with nothing, just with the clothes that they were wearing. They cut water, cut electricity. They started with systematic starvation policy toward the prisoners, where they minimized the daily amount of food they offered, and the raids to their rooms became very often, sometimes several times a day, accompanied with lots of violence by the special units using cover bullets or tear gas or other weapons, dogs, and physical, very harsh physical attacks. So far, since the 7th of October till today, more than around 73 detainees died out of torture and health neglect policy inside the prison. This is not includes several detainees from Gaza. Again, we don't know the accurate number of the Gazan detainees that they lost their life in detention out of torture and health neglect policies. And the torture that we were documenting mostly in the interrogation phase in the detention centers, where they interrogate the security service, interrogate the detainees, they started to use torture in a very widespread manner in all of the stages, like in interrogation, in detention, inside the prisons. Even after you are sentenced, you were sitting in your sentence and you would be tortured. The lack of hygiene and cleaning stuff and the crowdedness inside the rooms and closing the rooms, not allowing the detainees to go out for the recreation time, caused a very bad general health conditions that caused serious illnesses inside the prisons, mostly the scabious disease, the skin disease that were spreading until today. Lots of detainees are suffering from scabious. It caused a death in some cases. Just 1 month and a half ago, a 17-year-old boy, Walid Ahmed, lost his life because of the starvation and the scabious. The Israeli doctor who attended the autopsy, appointed by Physicians for Human Rights, wrote in his document confirming that the boy died out of the starvation and he was infected with the scabious, so together he couldn't survive. And the doctor was shocked by the scene of how much this boy was starved till death, like he was describing that he just saw bone and skin, nothing else, when he was sharing in the autopsy. So this is the situation of the prisoners. Currently, there's 10,800 prisoners inside the prisons. This includes 50 women, 450 children, 3,629 administrative detainees. This is the highest number of administrative detainees ever since 1967. In one moment, sitting inside the prison based on secret information, without any charge, without any evidences. All these people are arrested based on secret information, without any guarantee for any fair trial procedures. Those from Gaza, because the detainees from Gaza, they don't use the administrative detention, they call it illegal competent law, the law they use against them. They have also 2,454 detainees from Gaza that they are arrested based on secret information, claiming that they have connections to Hamas or Islamic Jihad or any other party that is declared illegal in the occupied territories, and they are waiting. Some of them, they are arrested since the 7th of October up till today without being able to understand why they are detained. I will end up just with the situation that the detainees from Gaza faced in the detention centers, especially under the army. The torture and the harassment and the abuse, the sexual harassment, the rape in lots of cases, using the handcuffs and the blindfold and forcing them in very stressful, painful positions, lots of humiliation and degrading treatment that were implemented for very long period. Some of these detainees were blindfolded and handcuffed continuously for more than 7 months, 8 months, some of them for complete 1 year, forced to sit on the ground, blindfolded and handcuffed for 1 year, going to sleep, to eat, to shower, to do all your needs while you're handcuffed and your eyes are blindfolded. The level of humiliation and intimidation that the detainees faced is unprecedented. And all these practices are without any accountability, because the internal system is not willing and not able and not offering any justice and not investigating. The only case, even the serious case of the rape of the Palestinian detainee, that was the video that was leaked, the 5 soldiers that they are facing criminal procedures in the military court for soldiers. Just last week, the judge offered for the military prosecution and the lawyers of the soldiers to try to reach an agreement about the sentence. And you should know that they never were faced with a charge of rape, but serious attack against the detainee. This is the justice system inside Israel. And this is why we believe that it's really the time for the international community to decide whether they really want this system of international law to work, or it's a system that was designed just to be imposed in one part of the world, on the south, and not on the white upper side of the world. And it's very hypocritic policies. And without all the recommendations that Susan pointed to be implemented, I think the system will collapse definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, Sahar, for that very powerful and disturbing report. We'll listen now to Dr. Hansen, who can't be here today, but he's sent his video recording. So we'll listen to that now. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to join in today for this event, and thanks, Siobhán, for taking the lead on organizing it. I'm joining you with a video recording as I'm on summer holidays at the moment. So what I would like to focus on in this brief intervention mainly concerns the broader global order implications of what has unfolded in the Middle East, and especially Iran in recent weeks in particular. So the first point that I would like to make is that it is alarming how limited a role international law has played in this context. Other experts joining this panel today are much better placed than myself to explain the technicalities of international law governing the use of force in international relations. That said, it seems absolutely clear to me that there's zero doubt that both Israel's and America's strikes in Iran were in blatant violation of UN Charter law. Indeed, it's impossible for me to see how any of the vague arguments presented concerning the legality of these strikes can possibly be accepted. For instance, that they simply present a continuation of an ongoing war with Iran, but there was no ongoing armed conflict, or that Iran developing its nuclear programs presented justifications for some version of self-defense, preventive or otherwise, that can be accepted as lawful under international law. But as Marko has already explained, that's clearly not how international law stands. The attacks, both by Israel and the US, were therefore clearly unlawful. There can be very little doubt about that. Yet the question about the legality of the action taken has played such a minor role in the debate about what has occurred. Whereas both Israel and the US have presented arguments why they believe it was justified to take the action they did, they have done very little to seek to convince the world that this action was indeed lawful under international law. And that's probably because it was so obvious to anyone with the most basic knowledge of international law that that was not the case. And that's perhaps expectable, looking to how the current governments in Israel and the US more generally relate to the idea of international affairs being governed by rules. They both, although in different variants, appear to take a more general position that even the most basic norms in international law are generally irrelevant or out of play in situations where these norms are seen to restrict their perceived interests. This is of deep concern, not only because the most powerful country in the world treats the norms it has helped develop with disregard, but also because it sends a message to others that basic norms in international law have been rendered meaningless. That observation connects to the second point I would like to make. It's not only Israel and the US that have once again sidelined basic norms in international law. It is extremely depressing to learn how leaders in Europe, by and large, stand by Israel and America concerning the action taken in Iran. While warning about a risk of escalation, Prime Minister Starmer backed the strikes, speaking to the need to make sure that Iran can never have a nuclear weapons program and can no longer pose a threat to the regional security. Never mind that evidence suggests that Iran was not about to develop that capacity, and never mind that Israel has indeed itself developed that capacity long ago. The British Prime Minister, together with Macron in France and Merz in Germany, even said they stand ready to contribute to that goal in coordination with all parties. Further, some European leaders ironically emphasized Israel's right to self-defense in the context of that country carrying out strikes that these leaders were fully aware did not amount to lawful self-defense, but rather amounted to action that would have almost surely labeled blatant violations of international law had they been taken not by their close allies. The approach taken by these European leaders present a dangerous path, risking to undermine the role of international law at a much more general level. For one, it will be impossible for many of us to take serious Starmer, Macron and Merz next time they call out their foes for breaching international law, including the prohibition of the use of force. Any future reference to global order being rules-based will ring more hollow than ever, including for governments outside the West. and that's not in the long-term interests of anyone. That leads me to the third and last point that I would like to make in this intervention. Of course, the idea of rules-based global governance has already been severely undermined by the action taken by Israel in Gaza and many Western governments' support for that over the last couple of years. The unlawful action taken by Israel in the US and Iranian soil is therefore not a standalone violation of international law. The unfolding genocide in Gaza continues as we meet here today to be committed with tacit approval of several key players in the West. As Israel sent its air force to bomb government buildings, critical infrastructure, and apartment blocks in Iran, its ground troops continued the attacks on civilians in Gaza, seemingly stepping up these attacks to new levels of atrocity. There can be no question that the systematic targeting of women, children, and the elderly waiting in line for food and other aid is evidence not only of war crimes, but of genocidal intent. The atrocities perpetrated by Israel's military forces in Gaza have now continued for nearly 2 years. Despite calls from UN bodies, human rights organizations, and many others, there's sadly no sign that Western governments are ready to use the kind of leverage that could effectively stop this genocide and to bring those responsible to justice. If we were to try to find something positive in this mess, I would say it is encouraging to see that both the ICJ and the ICC have intervened to hopefully one day bring a level of justice for the genocide in Gaza. But again, it's highly discouraging to see how governments in the West are reacting to this. Britain, for one, remains deliberately unclear whether it would enforce arrest warrants against Israeli leaders should they set their feet on British soil, despite clear obligations to do so under the Rome Statute, which Britain is a party to and claims to be a tremendous supporter of. German leaders have gone a step further, suggesting they may indeed invite Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to Berlin, and countries such as Belgium, that previously stood up for international justice, in this context have also more recently indicated that they will not perform their obligations under the Rome Statute when it comes to Israeli leaders. This approach fundamentally undermines international law. Yet the action taken by the ICC has come with a hard price for the prosecutors and judges involved, now sanctioned by the Trump administration simply for doing their job. Prosecutors and judges have not only had their visas to the US revoked, but they and their families are also sanctioned in other ways, including with asset freeze. While some European governments have stated their concern with the measures taken by the Trump administration, they have done little else to support the system of international justice that they have helped to build in the post-World War II context. So we are at a moment, unfortunately, where the very foundation of that system may indeed collapse if the necessary support does not come soon. So to conclude this brief intervention, action taken by Israel and the US in the Middle East and in Iran, generally supported by other countries in the West, threatens to undermine whatever credibility was left of claims by the West that it is supportive of international law. The general irrelevance of international law and debates about strikes in Iran is sadly evident not only from Western government statements on the matter, but also reflected in media reporting in mainstream outlets. While The Guardian, BBC, and New York Times have been busy reporting on the penetrating capacity of so-called bunker-busting bombs dropped in Iran and the B-2 bombers that carried these from bases in the US, they have done close to zero to contribute to public debate about the legality of the military action taken. Perhaps the event here today, even if it comes late, can make a small contribution to advancing more public debate about the action and attitude, not only of Israel, but also of the governments in the West, which are, after all, elected. It is about time that we hold our elected leaders to account for committing or condoning the most blatant violations of international law. Thanks for letting me contribute to this event here today, and I wish you all a good evening ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Thomas. I know you can't hear me, but thank you. There are two questions in the chat, and because of time reasons, I'm going to go straight to those questions. The first question is from David. David, I'm probably going to mispronounce your name, Kachatrian, who is an Armenian international lawyer, and he's concerned, as has been discussed particularly by Marko, about the normalization of an expanded interpretation of preventive self-defense rather than actual or imminent threats. And his question is, what can the academic community do in a more systematic way to push back against this dangerous reinterpretation of international law and help reclaim the narrative? Are there models for collective scholarly action or outreach that might be effective in this moment? And the second question, there's actually there are more questions coming up. So the second question is for Marko, who questions, because nuclear scientists were involved in a nuclear program that was a military nuclear program, why are they not legitimate targets? Maybe people could answer those, and we'll come to the third question. So the first question is there anything for international, is a question for international lawyers, which is there, what can the academic community do in a more systematic way to push back against this dangerous reinterpretation of international law, the expansion of the idea of self-defense? Anybody wish to take that?
Shall I try?
Yes. Yeah,
I have a depressing answer. The depressing answer is that there's nothing really we can do. I mean, the academic community of international lawyers should speak up, and it should speak truth to power to the extent that it can. But ultimately, fidelity to international law is not built by academics, it's built through politics. So if you want to make the world a better place, you go into politics and you advocate that respect for international law is a necessary and good thing. So that's what needs to be done. We have the blessing, if I can put it that way, that our prime minister in the UK is actually an international lawyer. He's an international lawyer who has actually worked on issues of self-defense in the past. He knows that this is illegal, yet he is also faced with the fact that he's dealing with the orange person in the White House, and that he needs to make decisions that impact the UK as well. And I understand why some Western states have been doing things that they've been doing, but the effects of their failure to criticize the US-Israeli strikes on Iran are corrosive. And David sort of mentioned, that this can corrode the whole system, and it's true. So if you want to see how this kind of preventive self-defense argument is enabled by the West relying on it, or Western countries relying on it, you look at Russia. Russia's justification for invading Ukraine is that at some point in the future, Ukraine would have attacked Russia. That is Russia's argument for invading Ukraine. It is legally the same argument without nuclear weapons, but actually they would put in nuclear weapons there, like the Russians. That Israel uses to say that they have the right to use force against Iran. On the question about whether posed by Richard about whether the scientists were directly participating in hostilities, the answer is generally no, they're not. Like, there is decades of consensus that various people involved in weapons programs are not themselves participating in hostilities. For example, an engineer or a worker in a factory that is building artillery or munitions or other weapons is not thereby directly participating in hostilities, cannot himself as a person be killed, targeted. The building is a lawful target. So you can totally bomb a munitions factory, and there might be people who are civilians inside it. And then if the loss of civilian life is proportionate, that is legal. But you cannot, for example, kill a munitions factory worker or owner or engineer in their bed while they're asleep in their house. So in that same way, if the Nazis killed Oppenheimer or Enrico Fermi in his, auditorium in his aula in Chicago, that would have been unlawful, because even though they were instrumental to developing the Manhattan Project, they were civilians, right? So I find it really difficult to justify the killing of Iranian scientists, the deliberate targeting of them. So not the targeting the nuclear facility in which they work, but targeting them as persons, I think is very difficult to justify. That kind of argument was made in the past by one American government military lawyer, Hayes Parks. Other people have generally not accepted that argument. So I will finish there.
Thank you, Marko. I don't know if we'll manage to get to all the questions coming up, but there's a question there for Susan and Sahar. Are there any limitations from morality, ethics, or religion that could possibly set limits for Israeli treatment of Palestine, considering that Israeli national law nor international law are capable of so doing? If so, how to proceed? That's from Katrina Simonen. I should add to that, I suppose, from myself, this disturbingly very powerful but very disturbing presentations from everyone intersecting in a way that escalates the Omni-crisis, that is the title of this presentation, this webinar, that international lawyers, and I'm sure beyond international lawyers, know. And even as Marko said, that Keir Starmer himself is an international lawyer, and I'm sure all the politicians and leaders have international lawyers that can inform them of what the law is. But we're not doing anything. And as Roua mentioned earlier on, that has been the case in the Levant from the beginning, but it is now it's now blatant, and it's, as Roua said at the end, well, all we have is international law, a way of connecting. Marko said, yes, campaign through politics, but I guess I'm just kind of overwhelmed about what can we do. And so in conjunction with the question from Katrina there, is there anything morality, ethics, or religion that could help? Is there anything at all that anyone has any idea that what we could do? I know Susan has put forward some very clear practical suggestions, but how are we to get to the point of actually implementing them? Anyone?
Thank you. And there's a lot to think about there in terms of morality as well. And I mean, even just every single person gauging their own moral compass on this as well. And I mean, I say this because there's like international lawyers and people of huge, like, who are very, have huge reputations before them, and who've, like in one of the cases that we worked on with Al-Haq and Global Legal Action Network, in a case that was taken on arms and to stop arms exports by the UK to Israel. One of the lawyers and some of the lawyers advising the government were satisfied with these really appalling assurances that were given by Israel, basically saying that they couldn't answer the questions relating to assurances because Israel had like security information that it couldn't give for these assurances. So basically there was no information given, and it was very, very clear that that these weapons were going for the commission of genocide and for the commission of internationally wrongful acts in the occupied Palestinian territory. And even with these very just really poor and disingenuous assurances given by Israel, we still had lawyers who were, one of them is a pillar of international law. I won't name the lawyer, but a pillar of international law, who signed off on the letter, you know. that this for the British government, you know, and I think we all have to check our moral compass. We all have to check our moral compass in the work that we do. You know, are we doing the right thing? Are we using our voice and our platform in the right way? And even with legal advice, is that legal advice to continue your legal career, or is it legal advice that's given from the right place? You know, could that legal advice have stopped the killing of thousands and thousands of Palestinians? And I think everybody has to go away and check themselves, you know, and when every single person comes together, it comes from the right place, I think change can happen. I actually am hopeful in international law, personally. I do have hope in it. I've hope in the people I meet. I've hope in the goodness that we see, especially with Palestinian solidarity around the world, the young generation of lawyers coming up who are just incredible. I have faith in them. And I also think, I mean, there has been some gains. You know, we've seen some incredible states coming forward, like South Africa, like Nicaragua, who've been really, really pushing things at the International Court of Justice. We've seen like some organs of the UN working relentlessly, like the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights, who've made communications to many different states and to companies to stop their arms exports to Israel. So I do see shoots, and I do see goodness and shoots out there, and a propensity to change. And I think that we can't lose that hope, even in the face of genocide. We can't lose that hope in the system. Like, we still have hope in the system. I'll pass it to Sahar.
Sahar, yes, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so I would just add on what Susan said, to highlight the importance of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions, because this is the only way I believe that will bring the change, and every one of us can do something in these platforms in different ways, like in the universities, to make sure that there's no benefits for Israeli academia, Israeli universities, from any programs, or especially if they are involved directly in any projects that benefits the army in their war in Gaza. So everyone should check exactly what he can do in these ways to make sure that they will feel that they should be accountable and pay the price. Because why they are continuing, why they are able to do all these horrors? Because they don't feel responsibility. They don't feel the price of the horror, the crimes that they are committing. And I think this is another point I wanted to highlight, is the collective efforts in order to protect any group or any individual that is facing harassment because of his solidarity with the Palestinian people. Because I think that change should also reach your countries, your governments, in the implementation of your legal systems, in the way of how we are seeing the police attacking, and like people are prosecuted for showing solidarity with the Palestinian people. This needs also reaction and fighting back, because I don't believe we can allow this hypocrisy that you can speak very loud when it comes for Russia and Ukraine, but you're not allowed to speak when it comes for Israel-Palestine.
Thank you, Sahar. We're pretty much out of time. There are some very detailed questions there for you, Marko. One is a very long, detailed question about enrichment of nuclear enrichment. I don't fully understand the question, I'll read it then.
The question is whether Iran was going to use the enrichment for some other peaceful purpose, for example, for a submarine. Iran does not have nuclear submarines. The reason why Iran wanted the uranium is because it sees the dictatorship Iran sees that if you're a dictatorship and you have a bomb, a nuclear bomb, you're not going to get attacked. Like that's the lesson of, I don't know, the Kim Jong-uns of the world, right? That's why the Iranian regime wants a nuclear bomb, because they think that's the way of preserving themselves. So I think that is fairly clear.
Thank you, Marko. There is, but we are really out of time, but maybe briefly that a question, could you elaborate on the argument of the Israeli attack as part of an ongoing armed conflict with Iran? I think you covered that.
No, I can't do that briefly.
Okay, we'll leave that one. All right. Thank you. I'm sorry we haven't been able to get all the questions in, but we are out of time. And I want to thank all of the presenters, Roua, Marko, Susan, Sahar, for such a very, very powerful and difficult discussion. And I want to thank you all. And I want to thank the audience for being here. And I want to thank Alan for managing it so well. Thank you.